Hello and welcome to Enzo's Theater of the World. I am your host, Enzo Cunanan, and my co-host, Ethan Cunanan.
Hello.
Yeah, my younger brother. And so, a little bit of background about this and what we're planning to do here. So, I am going to be, this October, a history student at Oxford. And so, I'm planning to make this podcast so I can just share with you the listeners the stuff that I find interesting, which it turns out is a lot because I remember when I was at school, I would try to talk to people about this stuff and it wouldn't come across, I guess, too well in a conversation format, so maybe a podcast will be better. I don't know. We'll see. There's a lot of stuff I'm interested in. That's why it's called the Theater of the World. The cover art for this is a 1500s map simply because A, the 1500s is my favorite period, and B, it sort of suggests a wonder that I think we've lost in dealing with these sort of subjects. We don't think about them with we don't have this curiosity for learning, probably because it's shoved down all our throats and the interesting bits are all left out. But, we'll try to bring some joy and levity to that. So today's topic, and I guess the first topic of the podcast in general, is about the Persian king Cambyses and the fake news which surrounds him. So, Ethan, what do you know about the Persian Empire from AP World History?
Was Darius the founder?
No, that was Cyrus.
Okay, Cyrus was the founder, then is Darius the one who said he was who claimed to be the heir and he wasn't really, but then he
This will tie into the story, yes.
Yeah, and then I don't know what Xerxes is doing.
And
he was doing something.
Yeah, oh, that's right. And I forgot, because you're listeners, I was the part of the last class to do AP World as the full all of history course. Ethan, from the class of 22 onwards, they've been doing this thing where they only cover from 1200-ish afterwards. So yeah, that's why Ethan isn't. But I did a project on the Persian Empire, and I could tell you, bastion of.
I mean, I'm trying to remember. We kind of.
Yeah, you did
we
brief.
We went from a quick discussion of prehistory and then straight to I don't know, it was Indus River Valley or something.
Yeah, and so the Persians were the largest land empire to exist up until that point, and they, at their height, so around the time Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC, they stretched all the way from what we would now call modern-day Bulgaria, or Thrace in the west, all the way to India, or what we would now call modern-day Pakistan in the east, and or as the Book of Esther calls it, from India unto Ethiopia, with 127 provinces according to the book, although that is probably an exaggerated number since it was not actually written during the Persian period, but that's a story for another day. The Persians were noted for their religious toleration, within limits, of course, as long as you paid your taxes, and generally being better, I guess, than Sparta.
They have the jizya tax, where you have to pay taxes.
I don't think so because they did not try to.
I don't think they had
They couldn't process you. They did Zoroastrianism, yes, but Zoroastrianism is not a missionary religion as far as I know.
Encouraged it a little, and that was it.
They always said Ahura Mazda did this for me, Ahura Mazda did that for me in the inscriptions, but
they had Zoroaster, what the symbol in their and things like that.
The Farvahar, I think, the winged man. Anyway, so Cyrus the Great, as many of you may or may not know, is the founder of the Persian Empire, and he conquered, first of all, the Median Empire in what is now modern day Iran. So the highlands of Iran, and then he conquered the Lydians in 547 BC, led by their rich king Croesus, and they were rich, you see, because they had invented gold coins, because they had a lot of gold lying around apparently, and their kings.
So they introduced gold coins.
I think so. Before this, you would just use silver or gold or weights,
raw gold.
Yeah, I guess. So and so then they conquered Babylon, and so Cyrus then died in 530 BC under mysterious circumstances while fighting somewhere in the northeast, in Central Asia. He either fought against a warrior queen called Tamiris, who is playable in Civ 6, and who supposedly chopped off his corpse's head and then stuck it in a wine bag and said, "Here you go, you have your fill of blood now," although this is according to Herodotus, or according to the even more unreliable source, the Greek Dr. Ctesias, who served in the Persian court and yet seems to have learned nothing there. Cyrus died again while fighting a tribe known as the Derbaceae, with their Scythian allies bringing in war elephants from India, and Cyrus died in the midst of the fighting.
Weren't the war elephants mainly from like Africa or something?
No, but they were also in India.
Did they have war elephants?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They had Asian elephants, so they were more common in Asia. Actually, there was a fun little article that we will probably discuss later, sometime in the future, about the extent to which war elephants were used in the ancient world.
And then also, like, what's up with like the Persian immortals? Like, is that mostly just glorified?
This is a side note, but the immortals were described by Herodotus as being like an elite guard of Persian soldiers, so-called. There were 10,000 of them supposedly, and that's because whenever one of them fell, another one would take their place, so it looked like they were like immortal.
I think that just means you can't tell people apart, because you would clearly see it's a different god.
Wikipedia does point out that essential questions regarding the unit remain unanswered because authoritative sources are missing, by which they mean no Persian source refers to them, so like...
And yet, the Deadliest Warrior decided it was enough to do a whole episode, mainly because they have very shaky historical research.
In all fairness, we do know what they would have worn. It's just that there's a lot of things regarding their administration.
Remember when they said Napoleon would have lost to Washington? In what universe does Napoleon lose a battle to Washington?
This is fair.
With the French art, he was like way later than them and was much better equipped. They were working with they were literally working with like putting scrap in their cannons.
And then the Greek writer Xenophon, who wrote a book called The Education of Cyrus, or Cyropedia, which sounds a lot like Wikipedia's shitty knockoff version, supposedly claims that Cyrus supposedly died peacefully in his bed, although this seems unlikely. Anyway, so however Cyrus died, whether it was against a warrior queen who chopped off his head, up against war elephants, or against old age, he died in 530 BC, and his son Cambyses became king. Now, Cambyses is supposed to have married his two sisters, and this is not yes, both of them. And this is not, in fact, uncommon in Zoroastrianism of the time, and indeed, like, imperial Zoroastrianism later, because they had this thing where kings could marry their cousins and stuff, and it was considered, like, okay, because, like, purity of blood or something. I don't know.
It's slightly fun. I think they just pick cousins because they're not, like, really part of your nuclear family, but also, like, they're still kind of related
now,
to
like,
you.
I'm not an expert on this, but I did read some of the literature, and my educated guess is that the reason they allowed sibling marriage at this time was because they were still working at the whole Zoroastrianism thing, and so they hadn't formalized it yet.
Does it have any rules against that kind of thing?
They didn't have any formal writings at the time period, so it
should be fine then, right?
I guess the Persian Herodotus says that none of the Persian judges who Cambyses consulted on the matter knew a law that allowed this, but they also knew a law that said the king could do whatever he wanted, so they just let him do it.
Settles it, doesn't it? No need to like argue over like religion.
Yeah, that's true. So Cambyses spent some time, I guess, organizing the empire, because it was only in the 5th year of his reign, in 525 BC, that he set off for a campaign against Egypt. And if you think about it, this makes sense, because the Persian Empire now covered all of the ancient Near East, and sadly this is an audio format, so I can't show you a map, but just picture modern-day Turkey, the modern-day Middle East, including Iraq, Iran, Central Asian countries, part of Central Asian countries, so like Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, I'm not sure, Kyrgyzstan, and Egypt is the only major power left in the region, and so
what about
Greece isn't unified. It's a bunch of city-states.
So they didn't see any point to conquer it?
Oh, they will eventually. It's just not like
the priority.
It's easier to oppose the Persians if you're one single person rather than 50 different people trying to coordinate something.
Why not knock it out of the way so you can get it off the list?
I think it's genuine. Well, because
did they just not think it was useful?
The Egyptians will be able to offer more resistance than the Greeks at this point. Although, of course, this is just, like, an educated guess because we don't have any documents, like, a history writing from the Persian side. Like, I hesitate to say that the Persians didn't write their history down at this time, but they, like, genuinely didn't, and I don't know if that's because we don't have the sources or because it just wasn't a thing that occurred to them, but, whatever, it's fine. It's worth noting, of course, and this is the history student in me coming out, that history writing as we know it is a very Western thing, etc., etc. Disclaimer out of the way. Okay, so in 525 BC, the pharaoh of Egypt was a guy named Psamtik III, and Psamtik had the really bad luck of becoming pharaoh after his father had died, who reigned for 40-something years, and his dad was named Amasis. And it turns out Amasis was actually a usurper. He had usurped the throne from the previous guy, a dude named Apries, because Apries did a weird and failed military campaign against a Greek city in Libya called Cyrene, and Apries failed, and so there was a civil war, and Apries got killed.
So
and
Apries' friends, or his son, was kind of looking
no,
out for the new...
No. Apries doesn't have any kids, and he does, but that's just a daughter, so according to Herodotus, so that's okay. So Apries is usurper, Amasis, has a son, Psamtik, and Amasis dies right before Cambyses decides to formally invade Egypt, and Psamtik is left trying to pick up the pieces and trying to defend against his neighbor's invasion, which is not going to go very well. And
especially for your first
here you go.
Right afterwards, it's not working.
Difficulty level.
That's
impossible.
Your first big challenge as a ruler. I think I just off myself.
And so he did have some people, like the Greek mercenary Phanes, who came from Herodotus' hometown of Halicarnassus, who he refers to as being both sound in judgment and bold in war. Yeah, totally not biased there. However,
bold in war kind of just sounds like you make bad decisions.
However, Phanes had already... However, I lied to you, because Phanes was not actually with Psamtik at this time, because he had already defected while his dad was dying or something to Cambyses, because he's like, I know who's going to win here, the Persian Empire or Egypt, we can see where that's going. And so we'll find out what happens, but he had left his kids behind in Egypt, so we'll find out what happens to them later.
Wow, bad father.
But Herodotus says that... Cambyses sort of made an agreement with a local Arab king to, bring, water skins across the desert so that, his army wouldn't starve to death, and that does seem true. He also then goes into a weird little discussion about how Arabian blood promises and how they like to cut their hands and then mix the blood, and then lap it up with their tongues, which I'm not entirely sure is true.
I think it could be true just without the licking part, because that's just like a blood brother pact.
Now, one of the reasons I love Herodotus is because he says he's not gullible. He does try to differentiate the reliability of sources, but I do think it's funny how much emphasis he puts on stuff no modern historian would consider reliable, such as, for instance, he says, "Oh, rain fell on Thebes. This was something that had never happened before. It was a bad sign." Okay? No, not really.
I feel like he has too much confidence in some things that probably are really iffy.
So anyway, the Persians decide to fight at a place, the Egyptians at a place called Memphis, because it's near Memphis. I don't know if it's actually, that's why it's called that, but whatever. So the Greek mercenaries who are left behind in Egypt fighting for the Egyptians, angrily, when they see Phanes on the Persian side, they take his kids and they cut their throats over a bowl, and then they pour wine and water into the bowl. This is according to Herodotus, and then the mercenaries drink down the blood and head off to battle.
I think I wouldn't do that. I would not want to risk getting super sick from kid blood before a battle.
And so Herodotus tells us that
imagine being drunk too. This is a bad idea.
Herodotus tells us that the fighting was quote unquote fierce, and that quote unquote the casualties were numerous on both sides, which I feel is every battle.
Saving face.
I feel like it's every battle. And it's the Egyptians, obviously, who got defeated, or else I wouldn't have to tell you about Cambyses' conquest of Egypt.
I bet they would have won if they didn't, get drunk and sick off of child blood and wine.
Now, Herodotus has a very interesting story here, which is that supposedly, when he visited the site of the battle, that you could still see the bones of the men who fell there, because apparently Yeah, so Herodotus would have been around in like 460, 450 BC. So we're supposed to believe, I suppose, that for 60 years they just let the bodies decay and the bones sit there, which, I guess. But
Going
supposedly,
on something about like
yeah,
skulls.
yeah, he claims that the Persian skulls are very brittle, and you can break them with a single pebble, whereas it's hard to smash the Egyptian skulls. And he claims the reason for that is because the Egyptians like to shave their heads, and so the sun thickens the bone.
That's also not how your bones work. And also, like, why would they not have lost then if you can break them with pebbles?
I do think it's interesting because we like to think that people of the past were dumb and stupid, and this doesn't do much to disprove that. But at the same time, he says, I witnessed something truly extraordinary here. He's trying to take this claim of reliability on, I saw it, which, some people later on in medieval and Renaissance times, they'll be like, someone else reliable saw it. But no, Herodotus is saying here, I saw it, which, not only says, look at me, I'm wealthy and well-traveled.
How does he not know that just, like, some of the, like, skulls were pretty damaged, and the other ones, some of them were left fine and intact, and so he was just, like, they were all from the different armies mixed together, but he just drew this weird division for no reason.
Yeah, that's why I say Herodotus had limits to his investigating ability.
It's not that back then they were stupid, it's that they thought the world was a lot crazier than it was.
That's true, but
which
also
is why they believed in dragons for, like, many, many years. Because, well, maybe.
And so, from here, we get to Cambyses' crazy behavior in Egypt, and I would like to point out that the majority of the stories are probably unreliable since they seems to have been taken from Herodotus from his sources in Egypt, and the Egyptian priests, as we will find out later on, who were not only the people who wrote the records in Egypt, but also had a very good motive to hate Cambyses, which we will get to later on when we talk about his quote-unquote sacrilege and quote-unquote, disrespect for the Egyptian gods. And so Herodotus claims that the ninth day after taking Memphis, which was the capital of Egypt at the time, Cambyses had a little parade, and he had Psamtik watch. And so first he had Psamtik's daughter dressed in slave clothing with a bunch of other Egyptian girls taken to fetch water. And this was so humiliating they started crying. And everyone else started crying, except for Psamtik, who just kind of bowed his head to the ground. And then Cambyses sent out the king's son with 2,000 other Egyptian kids, and they were all being led to die because, apparently some Persians had been killed, some Persian mercenaries had been killed, and they were like, for every man killed, 10 Egyptians must die or something.
Me, or like, was the whole thing with like the daughter and the whatnot? I feel like Herodotus is just being like weirdly fetish.
No, he's not describing it, so I don't think so.
It just brought up, and then he's like, oh yeah, and then they're gonna kill kids.
Yeah, I feel, and
there's no, it feels like he just felt the need to bring it up because he thought, like...
Yeah, so Psamtik supposedly then didn't do anything even when he saw his son led to his death. And then finally, Herodotus says, because he works in rule of threes, one of his old dining companions, a man well advanced in years but who had fallen so far from his previous estate, came asking for alms amongst the soldiers. And Psamtik apparently let out a great wail of misery and beat his head and called to his comrade by name. And of course Cambyses was like, why didn't you care this much about your own child? And he said, Son of Cyrus, the evils that have afflicted my family are too great to be wept over. Tears, however, were an appropriate response to the misery of my old companion, who on the very threshold of old age has been toppled from happiness and wealth and come to beggary, which sounds very Greek. Or maybe Egyptian, because the Egyptians were known for philosophy. Cambyses, in the event, according to Herodotus, was like, that's a good response. Let's spare Psamtik's son. Not the other man, just Psamtik's son. But it turned out...
Yeah, can his daughter get out of
no, because no, I guess.
Wow. Wow.
I'm just picturing her getting water.
Sexist Cambyses, apparently.
However, the man who had gone in pursuit of Psamtik's son discovered he had been the very first to be executed and was no longer alive. Psamtik, however, was honored, except for the fact that he tried to rebel against Cambyses, supposedly, which seems likely. I'm not sure he would have taken kindly to the conqueror of his kingdom. And so, according to Herodotus, he drank bull's blood and died because everyone thought that bull's blood was like poisonous back then.
I think drinking copious amounts of any blood is probably not healthy.
So this is where it gets really insane. So Herodotus supposedly went to the city of Sais because that was where the previous dynasty was from, and he apparently gave orders that Amasis, who was the dad of Psamtik, if you'll remember, Amasis's corpse was to be exhumed from its resting place and brought outside. This is my Herodotus voice. It's a very booming voice. Once this had been done, he commanded his men to whip it, to pluck out its hairs, to stab it, and to inflict on it any number of other insults. The corpse, however, because it had been mummified, stood immune against this and refused to fall to pieces.
I don't think that's how mummification
So Cambyses ordered the body to be burned, and Herodotus points out that the Persians honor fire because they're Zoroastrians, and also you can't burn mummies in ancient Egyptian stuff because that literally destroys the soul of the dead person. And so some people think, and so Herodotus blames this on Cambyses being insane. I think that this did happen, but I think it was a different reason, because if you'll remember, Amasis was a usurper, and so it seems to me that Cambyses was trying to be, like, establishing himself as a legitimate pharaoh, and so the only way he could establish himself as a legitimate pharaoh is if the previous pharaoh wasn't legitimate, and so he'd say, look at me, I'm avenging Apries by executing this foul usurper Amasis, by burning his corpse, and so, that could have been a sort of way to try to bridge the continuity gap between Egyptian and Persian. Although, of course, Herodotus wouldn't get that, and the Egyptian priests wouldn't like it either, considering they had taken quite fondly to Amasis, who had reigned for 40-something years, so it's kind of like, hey, remember this guy from 6 decades back? Well, same. Like, okay, no, that's not, no, that's... Similarly, Cambyses is then said to have thought of doing 3 campaigns against 3 separate peoples, against Herodotus claims against the Carthaginians, against the Ammonians, and against the quote-unquote long-lived Ethiopians beside the southern sea, which, yeah, okay. So, he wanted to dispatch his ships against the Carthaginians, he forgot that, I guess, that the Carthaginians were Phoenician in descent, and so his Phoenician sailors were like, we ain't attacking our own children, and also we surrendered willingly to you, so, during Cyrus's time. So, he had to kind of call the thing off, which I think is funny as hell. He just kind of forgot. It's like when Daenerys Targaryen forgot about the Iron Fleet in the last season of Game of Thrones. And so, the Ethiopians, his first mission against them was supposedly an espionage mission, because supposedly they had a Table of the Sun, which was a meadow at the edge of the Ethiopian capital, where every night Ethiopian officials put a bunch of meat there, and then during the day anyone can come in and take it from it like a buffet, which I think is a really neat idea. But Herodotus claims that Cambyses sent the messengers to Ethiopia with a bunch of gifts, and the Ethiopians are apparently very handsome people, and they choose their king based on how tall he is, and
that's definitely not true, but
I think Herodotus is just saying this because there's this weird tendency, there's this tendency in Greek thought to either idealize or make monstrous the people who live farthest from you. So the Indians are thought to have in Pliny the Elder and stuff, in Roman times, are thought to be home to a lot of monstrous races, but Herodotus is also drawing on inspiration from Homer, who speaks of how the Ethiopians are also the handsomest of all men, and how they dine with Poseidon.
I think they're just treating it like fantasy.
It is fantasy.
Where, your humans, or Greeks in this case, are, the default race, and everyone else, humans, but they have weird quirks.
So Herodotus then does this wacky culture shock episode where he talks about where he tries to show where the Persians try to show the Ethiopian king about purple dye, and he's like, aha, you're lying because your garments are deceitful, and then they show him a twisted gold necklace, and he's like, ha, these are not strong chains, and then they show him some bread, and he's like, no wonder you only live 80 years. Well, you know what we eat? We just eat boiled meat and milk.
Which would definitely kill you faster than eating only bread. And 80
That's
is
so
a long...
bizarre. He also claims supposedly that the Ethiopian king then showed them a pool where nothing could float and everything sank to the bottom.
Isn't that just... Wait, no, the...
That's the Dead Sea, I guess. Except this one is supposedly like spring water, which actually allows you to be and it leaves you with an olive oil like sheen. And supposedly the Ethiopians
Are you sure it's not just like oil?
And supposedly the Ethiopian... Well, no, because Herodotus says, assuming the Ethiopians use it for everything, it would explain their longevity. Oh, okay. I thought it said for a moment he thought they drank.
I don't know. If I would not drink water that stuff just sank in for no reason. I would be a little concerned.
He also claims that the Persian spies, or diplomats, I guess, the Persian diplomats saw a dungeon full of men where everyone was shackled with fetters of gold, which, no, probably didn't happen.
This is because among the Ethiopians, it is bronze which ranks as the rarest. How? It's an alloy.
He also claims that...
It's an alloy.
He also claims that Ethiopians do mummify their dead, but instead of just drying it out, they smear it all over with plaster and adorn it in paint and put it inside of a translucent column. And so you can see, it's like a see-through material.
Which is not how they did it.
I don't think that's how they did it. I'm not an expert, but that's
works. You just end up with a very stinky plaster.
And so Herodotus says that Cambyses got so mad, apparently, at this report of them having, like, immortality water and, like, a free buffet, I guess, that he immediately launched an attack on the Ethiopians without having built up any stockpiles of food, or, quote-unquote, taken into account that the target of his expedition lay at the very ends of the earth. And so Herodotus explicitly calls him insane at this point. He calls him quite out of his senses. And so he says that all of his men, except for the Greeks he had with him in Egypt, went with him. And so he... supposedly his soldiers marched, but apparently they ran out of food, and then they ran out of the pack animals because they were all consumed, and then they ran out of grass, and then supposedly they started eating themselves, and Cambyses was like, okay, that's enough, turn back around, clearly we're not gonna make it here at this rate.
Oh, fuck it, I'm not bringing them back, that's too... You're gonna get other people killed then, let them die.
I think this seems to be false based on the archaeological records, because it is... Because
you would have found a lot more weird shit.
Later Persian kings do count Ethiopia as being a tribute paying province to them, so clearly something happened which caused them to be like, okay, we'll give gifts to you and stuff, and ivory and slaves and stuff.
Oh, so surely you could just find all of these dead people in the...
Yeah, and also be there is evidence of, like, Persian garrisons at a fort near on the border of Ethiopia, so maybe they did do some action there. I don't know. And also, it's likely that there's a more prosaic explanation than this whole insane thing. And it's a thing we see nowadays, too. We like to say, oh, we don't understand something. Oh, the politician must be insane. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the politician isn't incompetent, but they just are thinking in a way that we can't grasp. And so
like a bad way, like a
well, no, but this isn't
poorly thought out way.
Well, no, maybe it's like from a different country. That's what I'm trying to say. Because Herodotus isn't from Persia or Egypt, so he wouldn't have known that the Egyptian kings were very concerned with subduing the quote-unquote 9 bows, or the enemies of civilization in Libya and Ethiopia, which is now modern-day Sudan. And so that's why Cambyses would have made these campaigns against Ammonia, which is in Libya, and the Ethiopians, because he's trying to show himself as a legitimate pharaoh. And as to what happened to that Ammonian expedition, well, Herodotus claims that there was a city known as Oasis, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and that near it was the Oracle of Amun, and that supposedly, Cambyses wanted to capture the oracle for some reason, and so he sent 50,000 men out to the desert, but then, like, a sandstorm hit, and then they all suffocated and died, and that's why you can't find the remains. Incredibly enough, some people have taken this at face value and tried to look for the remains, and some people have claimed they did find it, but then later they got exposed for lying,
I think
so...
if you take any Greek or Roman source for face value, you're a real dumbass.
And so Herodotus then goes into, then details some of the cultural faux pas, or perhaps, big fuck yous in this case, I guess, that Cambyses does to the Egyptians. And so, first of all, he claims that he stabs the Apis bull. The Apis bull was a sacred bull in Egypt, and he was considered not only a god in his own right, but he was also considered, the herald of the god Ptah, the god of creation in Memphis. And so Herodotus claims that at this time, when Cambyses arrived back from his Ethiopian campaign, the Apis bull was being celebrated by the Egyptians. But Cambyses got very mad, apparently, and said that, and when the Egyptians were like, oh, we're celebrating our god Apis, he put them all to death for lying, and then he said, so some pet god has turned up in Egypt, then I want to know all about it. And then they brought the Apis bull to him, and then can you just read this, Ethan? It's just a campy passage in general. Do your best evil voice impression. No, only for the quote. The priests.
You poor fools. What kind of...
No, the priests brought in Apis, and Cambyses, who was teetering on the edge of madness, drew a dagger and struck him, aiming for the belly, but hitting the thigh instead. Cambyses laughed, and then spoke to the priests.
You poor fools. What kind of god is born a thing like this? Nothing but flesh and blood, and vulnerable to a touch of iron? The kind of god, no doubt, that you Egyptians deserve. But do not think you'll get away with fooling me. And then, I guess, killed it.
Yeah, he killed it. And then he claimed that all the priests should be flogged without mercy, and everyone else...
Man, if you thought that the cow was stupid for dying, I don't think he would have been very happy about
You a stupid
Jesus.
cow, you a stupid cow.
Imagine if he found out about Jesus, just like some mildly okay homeless man.
So he claims that the bull died of his wounds, and the priest secretly buried him. Except this is a total lie, at least for the secret burial part, because there was a Apis bull which died during Cambyses' reign, but Cambyses set up a stela honoring its lifetime, and saying, oh, I buried it, and I participated in the proper rites, and he even refers to himself like, I'm Masuti Re, the pharaoh, because that's his, regnal name, because he got that Egyptian name. He does seem to have actually ingratiated himself with, sort of tried to portray himself as an Egyptian king.
Easier than trying to, fight everyone.
And I'm not going to say that and some of the Egyptian sources, it's true, do say, oh, the temples were ransacked somewhat during the invasion, but that's just because it's an invading army. It's not because Cambyses went out of his way to say, fuck you to all the Egyptian priests. And although he sort of did do that, because as the Egyptian pharaoh, he got to control the amount of money that the temples got, and so he decided that they were all going to receive less money except from him as the pharaoh, except for 3 specific temples, and this seems to have pissed off the Egyptian priests so much they just claimed he was not only guilty of that, but guilty of sacrilege and guilty of blasphemy and guilty of disrespecting every single one of their gods.
What happens when you don't give the religious people their monies? They get mad at you.
I think there's also a parallel to be drawn to the modern day in this, frankly, which is that if you piss off the wrong people, they will write horrifying stuff about you and you'll never be free of it.
Yeah, like Scientology.
Well, I mean, if there's any Scientologists listening to this,
stop being a Scientologist.
Yeah, it's a cult. Anyway,
also, I don't think you're allowed to listen to outside podcasts.
That's true. That's true. So Cambyses then supposedly killed his sister wife. I don't know which one because he doesn't specify according to Herodotus, but Cambyses killed her either because when they were watching a lion's cub fighting a puppy, the puppy was losing, but its brother rescued it. And Cambyses saw his wife was crying, and she was like, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "I cried because when I saw the puppy coming to the rescue of its brother, I was reminded of Smerdis, our brother whom you killed, and it struck me that there is now no one to come to your aid."
What are you for? You're his wife.
And sister.
You can't help him?
And so then Cambyses murdered her. Although, according to another source that Herodotus says, the Egyptians claim that one day while everyone was sitting around the table, Cambyses' sister wife took a lettuce and plucked off all its leaves and asked her husband whether he liked it better with the leaves or was stripped bare. And he's like, "One thick with leaves." And she's like, And yet, what have you done? If not strip bare the house of Cyrus so it resembles this lettuce. Cambyses got so mad that he leapt on her, and she was pregnant, and she miscarried and died.
I just like the funny idea of him, like, pushing her over and doing, like, an elbow drop from the top rope onto her belly.
We see the lettuce flying everywhere.
Oh!
Oh, Anyway, so I hope that isn't true. It doesn't seem to have been true. So, Herodotus...
Never, like, just, like, dropped a soup dumpling. It looked a lot like that.
Herodotus says, such were the ways in which Cambyses was affected by his madness. Or perhaps bearing in mind how many ailments there are to which mankind is prone, his lunacy was caused by something else altogether. And he said his madness also affected other Persians. And so, for instance, there was a dude named Persiaspes who was a royal advisor, and his son was like his cupbearer. And Persiaspes said, and Cambyses asked Persiaspes what the Persians thought of him, and he said, oh, they love you, except for the fact that they think you're an alcoholic. And he's like, so now the Persians are saying I'm too fond of wine, are they? That has driven me mad? That I am not in my right mind? Then what they told me before, that I was a good dude, was just a lie.
Not really, actually. He's blowing it way out of proportion.
And then so he said, and Cambyses then said, do you see your son, Persiaspes, standing over there? Well, I am going to shoot him with my bow. Now, if I manage to hit him directly in the heart, then that will make as clear as it can be that the Persians have been talking nonsense. So he drew his bow and shot the child, who fell to the ground dead. And the arrow was in the heart. He had managed to hit him squarely in the heart. And so Cambyses then said, it is clear as can be. I am not mad. It is everyone else who has gone insane.
I like the concept that being good at aiming means that you can't be insane.
Herodotus then remarks very offhandedly that Cambyses apprehended 12 Persians and buried them alive at first without any comment.
That's funny.
Like, you're not gonna tell us what happened there?
I think head first is funny just because I'm thinking of, like, them, they're buried, but only from, like, the torso up, and they're just, like, got their legs sticking out, like someone did, like, a huge pile driver and, like, slammed them into the ground.
And so Croesus the Lydian then came up, who was an old advisor of Cyrus, and also, if you'll remember, supposedly the former king of Lydia. I say supposedly because there's debate whether or not Croesus actually lived after the invasion of Lydia, because some people claim he burned himself alive, and some people say that the god Apollo kidnapped him, and some people say whatever. So Croesus then said, maybe you shouldn't be killing everyone. You're killing kids. That's not good, because then people will revolt against you.
You know, the kids are the future. Think on that.
And Cambyses said, you have some nerve to offer me advice. You who told my father to go fight against those Central Asian nomads and then got him killed. Oh, dare you, you're very incompetent. And so Cambyses then tried to shoot him with a bow again. And Croesus was like, nah, I'm out of here. And then after a few days, Cambyses was like, oh, I'm sad. Where is Croesus? And they're like, remember, your majesty, we killed him just as you asked. But his servants were lying. They knew that he would regret it eventually, so they just hid him away, I guess, somewhere safe. And so after a few more days, he's like, where is Croesus? And they're like, okay, fine, we saved him because we knew you'd like that. And he's like, yay! And then he's like, wait, but you disobeyed my orders. Go die!
Wait, about what?
About killing Croesus.
Wait, why?
Because they had hidden him away and they hadn't killed him.
Even though did he find out?
Yes, because they told him later on when they were like, okay, yeah, because he was like, oh, I wish Croesus was back.
At that point, I think I would have just ganged up on him because we're multiple people and he's very annoying to be around.
And this is according to Herodotus' story. It's likely Cambyses wasn't this crazy, but it is a good story. And as we say in the history trade, when we want to talk about stories which are interesting but almost certainly never happened, it gives us an insight into how these people thought of a certain subject.
I was just going to say you can put it on the History Channel because you don't have to fact check there.
That's true. He also claimed that during Cambyses' stay in Memphis, he broke into ancient tombs and examined the corpses, which honestly just makes him sound like an 1800s archaeologist.
Yeah,
so
Herodotus calls that crazy, but if you go into the future a little bit, like 1800s, archaeologists just meant rich guy with dynamite.
He also claims that he went into the shrine of the god Ta, the creator god of Memphis, and that he mocked him and laughed hysterically at his statue.
That's fair though. Isn't Best like short?
No, Ta. But he seems to have confused him with Best, the Egyptian god of like
Best is
childhood.
Because Best is like short.
He seems to have confused him with the god of childhood, Best, the childhood protector god, because he claims that the statue of Ta looked like a dwarf, and that is very manifestly Best. And so I think it's funny, actually I don't think it's funny, it's kind of religiously insensitive, but whatever.
It doesn't matter, it's not a real
It didn't happen. This probably did not happen. And so then, Cambyses, according to the story, Cambyses was in Egypt, and he was, quote unquote, quite out of his mind. And there were two brothers who were both magi, and one of the magi, Pataziphes, was like, you know what, bro? You kind of look like Smerdis. Remember? The brother of Cyrus. And he's like, what? The brother of Cambyses. And his brother, his brother was like, what? But Smerdis is dead. Cambyses murdered him so that he couldn't lay claim to the throne. He's like, yeah, but what if we claim you're the real Smerdis? And that, because it was a secret murder, so no one outside of the court knows it happened. And so Pataziphes proclaimed his brother king. And he was like, this is the real Smerdis, and he is now king, because Cambyses is out of his mind. And Cambyses said, what? That's an imposter! And everyone's like, how is that the case? And he's like, I killed my brother. And everyone's like, whoa! And he's like, I'm gonna head back to Persia now, bye! But supposedly, when he headed back to Persia, well, he jumped on his horse, but he was so excited to get on the horse that his dagger fell out of its, like, sheath, and it stabbed him in the thigh, just like the Apis bull.
Which, I don't think that's how any of that would work.
Although, according to another source, which is Theseus, the doctor, Cambyses was just woodworking in Babylon one day, making an arts and crafts project when he managed to hurt himself.
Which honestly sounds a lot more likely than your knife falling out of your sheath.
When he managed to hurt himself and die.
It would cut you, maybe. That just sounds like a bad sheath. Like, for it to stab you from just falling, it would have to be fairly high up. I don't know what he's talking about.
And so you may think, oh, the story of an imposter.
That Amogus.
Sussus Amogus. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. So, you may think that this story is unbelievable, but incredibly, the next king, Darius, also claimed that this so-called Smerdis, or as he calls him, Gaumata, he claims that Smerdis was... The Persian name for Smerdis was Bardia, and that was supposedly the brother of Cambyses. But Darius has a big inscription called the Behistun inscription, where he claims, no, this Bardia was a magus named Gaumata. And many historians think he is lying because this is just such a stupid story that, like, supposedly none of the courtiers recognized him either. And it had to take 7 different...
Also, like, when someone tells, hey, you kind of look like this person, usually they don't mean, hey, you look literally exactly like that one guy. Like, right? Like, there's people who kind of look like celebrities, but I don't think you'd like, mistake them for that.
In all fairness, there was no ID card back then, so I can understand.
Yeah, but, like, come on.
Although Herodotus claims that the reason that no one found him out before now is because he didn't have any ears because he had been mutilated, so, like, but as, like, punishment for a crime, but, like, he wore them always by wearing a big turban, so no one could find out.
Why didn't he just say that in their fight, Smerdis got his ears cut off?
And so...
That sounds like a more plausible idea, right?
And so it took, apparently, one of a conspirator's daughter in Smerdis's... in the Magus's harem to, like, feel for his ears and was like, no, they're not there.
Why would they not... Because Smerdis was supposedly killed, right?
Yeah.
Why would they not just say that in a fight with his brother, his ears got cut off, right? That's more likely, right?
It doesn't see... And again, I think it's really telling that I think it's telling that there is no evidence that Smerdis or pseudo-Smerdis, maybe, whoever this Smerdis was, whoever this king was, every single person in the empire seems to have accepted him. Not every single person, but there was no big revolt. The revolts came when Darius killed the Smerdis, or the imposter Smerdis, At which point there were multiple rebellions across the empire, 19 battles in a
I
single
think
year.
that no, it's not that they didn't think that they believed Smyrtus. They were just tired of Cambyses.
Although, no, but Cambyses, if you'll remember, probably didn't do that stuff because the Egyptians...
Yeah, but maybe it just wasn't super great, like, despite that.
I mean, yeah, that's true. I think that one of the things you can take away from this is, I mean, there's a lot of... The farther back you go in history, the more stuff is uncertain. B, please, for the love of God, fact-check your sources.
And, C, if you're trying to impersonate someone and you have, like, missing features... You should probably claim that you lost them in an accident rather than trying to hide it.
Yeah, so...
You're gonna have to take off the turban eventually, right?
Yeah, so...
Why not just say you lost them in an accident?
So to wrap up today, we have managed to talk about a lot of things in this topic, including imposters, sandstorms.
Did we talk about the sandstorm?
Yes, we did. We talked
was that?
The Oracle of a Moon and how the 50,000 men supposedly all got suffocated by it and died, and which is why there's no evidence of it.
No, because we would at least have archaeological records by uncovering the sand.
The Fountain of Youth, lettuce, incest, and mocking Egyptian religion. So yeah, that is the end of this first episode of Enzo's Theater of the World. Until next time, y'all. Goodbye.
Bye.